Good morning, everybody. Welcome, distinguished guests, for joining us on our report launch. This is a report launch, the collaboration of 5 organizations with regards to the impact of the recent network disruption entitled Lockdown and Shutdowns. So as we mentioned, this is the collaborative effort of 5 organizations. The 5 groups are Athan, or Freedom of Expression Activist Organization, Peace and Development Initiative, Education for Peace and Development, and the Rohingya Youth Association, and then the Cyberlaw Clinic and the International Human Rights Clinic at Harvard Law School. And we've co-publishing this report together, and today we will be sharing the key important points from this report. As soon as we finish presenting from our esteemed panelists, we would encourage those of you who are attending to submit your questions through the chat box, the Q&A. And we encourage you all to share the findings as well as follow us along. Soon we will upload the reports there as well as a recording of this session there. But the first thing I'd like to tell you is that, as you can see, we have 2 options on the language interpretation. We are doing simultaneous interpretation. So once you're in the Zoom as an attendee, you'll see on the bottom that there are 2 buttons. There's either a globe or 2 language options. So for the Burmese speakers, please go ahead and select Burmese. And for the English speakers among us, please go ahead and press the English button. And we will be, as I mentioned earlier, recording the session, and we will upload it and once again. So once again, we've got 2 language available. So for those of you who are guests, if you could click on the English, and if you are wanting to hear the presentation in its original content in Burmese, please go ahead and select. You'll see it on the bottom of the screen. So we are going to give some time for our panelists as well as attendees to select the language. So let's start off. Once again, we want to extend our thanks to those who are attending us on this very timely as well as important report. And each of the panelists from each of the groups will be presenting the key points related to the report. And they're all here. So I'm going to introduce myself first off. My name is Ye Wipyo Aun. I am a founding member of Athan as well as a coordinator. Today I will be facilitating and emceeing this event. And thank you for everyone, and very nice to meet you all. So the very first thing that we will be doing is that we are going to cover things related to the internet shutdowns in Bangladesh and Myanmar, and then we're going to have the different presenters talk about the latest developments and the most recent up-to-date developments regarding this, as well as what is happening related to the restored internet shutdown in Bangladesh and how it's affected Rohingya refugees there. And we will end off the presentation with our last panelist, which will be focusing on the international human rights ramifications, as well as the different legal principles related to how internet shutdowns affect that. So that's our presentation overall will take about 40 minutes or so. And then after that, we want to leave enough time at the end so that those of you who are watching and attending who wants to ask questions, please go ahead and put it in the Q&A questions. In the chat box, you'll see it. We will be monitoring it, and we'll try and squeeze in as many questions as we can answer. and the panelists will be answering your questions. So please feel free. So I'm gonna turn it over and start off with the panel presentation. So first off, we're gonna have representing Athan with Go Samkat. He's the founder and he's the director of Athan. And Go Samkat is going to present about the latest update on the current internet shutdowns. Please go ahead, Go Samkat, you have the floor. Thank you very much, Goyewe, for the introduction. And thank you to esteemed panelists for attending our panel. One of the things that I want to talk about today, the three groups that are in country as well as the international colleagues and allies at Harvard Law School, Cyberlaw Clinic, as well as the International Human Rights Clinic. This collaborative report is something that we all work together and thought of. So the main focus for Athan has long been around freedom of expression, as well as documenting violations, as well as profiling human rights defenders and amplifying their voices. And we've pushed for law reform domestically to create freer space and civil society space for people in Myanmar. And I also want to introduce to you all my co-panelist, Go Sanlai. He's from PDI Kintha organization, Peace and Development Initiative Foundation, based out of Rakhine and based in Sitwe town. A lot of people inside Myanmar, of course, need no introduction to Go San or the PDI's incredible work in Rakhine. And one of the work that PDI has done has been on the ground mobilization, promoting tolerance and fostering harmony between communities, trying to do cross-cultural exchanges between different ethnic religious minorities and different groups. And we've got this other panelist, Go Kimao from Rohingya Youth Association. He's a founder and the executive director. And RYA, I want to tell you a little bit about, since 2017, a lot of the members of RYA are Rohingya refugees who have had to flee the persecution and the clearance operation committed by the authorities and military. And they've been focused a lot on promotion of youth capacity, promoting their capacity, as well as encouraging educational opportunities. And last but not least, we've got Jess Fell, who is the assistant director of the Cyberlaw Clinic. And she'll be talking a lot around, and we're invaluable support around the international human rights law, as well as how does what's happening in Myanmar relate to internet shutdowns. And also on the interpretation is my Athan, who's a clinical instructor and lecturer on law at the International Human Rights Clinic, one of the co-authors, along with Jess, of this report. And she also has been really integral in helping facilitate not just the international human rights, bridging that, but also encouraging the collaboration amongst the different communities that we've been working on this. And I just wanted to say, from Athan's perspective, I'm so grateful for this collaboration and work together with all these people that I'm on this panel with. So first of all, when we talk about internet shutdown, really in reality, it affects also the fact that we've had internet shutdown for our Rohingya colleagues in the refugee camps in Bangladesh. So, for example, the internet shutdown in Bangladesh lasted for almost a year. In fact, it was close to a year, but thanks to the international pressure, the Bangladesh authorities were able to restore the internet access for the refugees. And one of the things for people in Myanmar is we also have been demanding for it. And, they did restore it to a certain degree, but it was only up to 2G. But 2G is reality, not access and unencumbered access to the internet. If in an emergency you want to call, you want to upload photos, you need to contact loved ones, if you need help, or if you are trying to receive data or information, or you're trying to document and circulate information amongst your network, 2G is it's equivalent to not having internet access in some ways. I mean, if I have to assess, the restoration to a certain degree, there's a Burmese saying, it's like trying to sweeten and get something by using honey. It's in reality, underneath that honey, it's not really changed anything. It's just covering up. So for the my assessment is that government and the authorities, if they were really genuine, they really need to restore full access all throughout Rakhine state, as well as Chin state, and all these different townships that are affected by it. So for instance, the youth activists and the human rights defenders who come out again and again demanding a restoration, instead, many have been arrested just calling for the restoration of the internet. A lot of people are facing trials. A lot of people are still not given bail, and they are being detained simply for exercising their right to call for a restoration of internet access. Some people are even facing and has been sentenced up to 7 years jail simply for exercising their right. And their only crime for going to jail for 7 years, it's honestly trying to demand for peace and trying to spread the message around restoring internet using paper, trying to spread posters. This is not proportionate to the actions of these activists and human rights defenders. So I don't even want to bring up the legal side. Just think about the injustice that happens when you've got people and activists going around spreading, sharing knowledge through paper, and is that proportionate to the 7 year sentence that they've been handed down? And when we think about Rakhine, the history of Rakhine is rife with conflict. It's just, we talked about the constant armed conflict that's been engaged in Rakhine for since a really long time. So I feel like this internet shutdown only serves to heighten and hamper the already very difficult situation facing people within those states. And the activists who are trying to restore it are instead being subjected to these unfair trials and are being there's a collaboration between the authorities and the folks who are pursuing these charges against human rights defenders. And we believe that the military is complicit in this endeavor because, on the one hand, they are committing the offensive, and at the same time, under the light darkness of not having internet, by silencing people, it makes it easy for people to commit crimes without any documentation or an ability for people on the ground to report. Um, so if I have to summarize, without a doubt, the authorities, as well as the military, as well as different parties, have a role to play in restoring, but instead they are gambling the security, the health, the education and business and compromise and opportunities that the people in this country, um, the effects. In a way, we really see that it may seem like it's not a a grave violation, but it affects so many ramifications, and there's a real domino effect in it. So from this point, I'm going to turn it over to Gojo-san Line, so he can talk about the on the ground impact specifically on Rakhine State. So I would like to turn it over to Gojo-san now. I think that Gojo-san's internet bandwidth dropped, so why don't we So while we wait for Gojo-san line to come back, let's see if he can join us. Otherwise, we'll go to Kokemau in Bangladesh to present. Kucho Sanlan, can you hear us? So sorry, Go Kamau. Can I get you to go first? Go Kamau, could you please tell us a little bit about what's happening on the ground in Rega? Thank you very much. For us, we really wanted to collaborate on this report because this is something that has affected our community. And that's why we worked on this. So when we were in Rakhine, we didn't have full freedom. We didn't experience full human rights and dignity. And we suffered a lot in our mother country. Our lives are constantly trapped in these cycles of suffering. So we really respect what Ko Sang-kha said earlier about freedom of expression and freedom of speech. So I want to tell you about the one case that happened to us in the camps. So for example, when COVID outbreak happened as a global pandemic, we had no internet in the camps. We were deprived of this by the Bangladesh government and authorities. And the NGO workers and humanitarian workers were prevented from coming the thing. We had no way of finding out information about how COVID contracts, how do we do to prevent ourselves and keep ourselves and our community safe. We needed a lot of help. We needed information, even to try and spread the word amongst ourselves. How do we organize people to keep each other safe? And we try to organize, but the whole point was we were supposed to social distance, and we didn't want to keep more than 5 people together at any given time just to keep the disease under control. So we we found that a lot of people didn't have any health information, basic health information that could have been easily shared through the internet. If we could communicate to each other, we could have shared. We couldn't people, you can imagine the amount of fear and panic that people had in these camps. You know, we had to flee our country after these clearance operations and the armed conflict. We have relatives left behind in Myanmar. We have others who have had to flee as migrants, as refugees in other countries. And our desire to connect, you know, if we could have, we couldn't connect to these people, our special loved ones, you know. You know, just many tried to contact us, but they couldn't contact us. Same code, right? You know, I'll give you an example. We also had another case. You know, we have really elderly and other refugee population who are vulnerable. And when they fall ill, you know, we need relatives who can, in the camps or outside, to help or contribute or even take them to medical services. And without this communication tool, it's extremely hard for us to be able to support. So like Coach Sangha covered, you know, obviously it's a deprivation of our human rights, but it's also a really hard situation made even more difficult. And also we think that the way of contacting each other, maintaining that community is so essential, especially when people are suffering through trauma, physical and health. And we also think that that connection and that communication and knowledge is what keeps people from going off the wrong path. So I want to talk like education is a huge key tool of equalizing people, ensuring we have a brighter future. So we were deprived of the right to learn from extended higher education when we were in Myanmar in our role as Rohingyas. So, you know, we so once we got to Bangladesh, we tried to do what we can, try to study English on our own. We try to learn online. And we used to try and do group studies with ourselves as youth to try and find a way to hope for the future and up, build up our own capacity. But then, just some history for those of you who are not familiar is like after 2012, we were not allowed to attend higher education in Myanmar. We were not allowed to go past, 10th grade education. We were not given an opportunity by virtue of our, lack of citizenship rights. So everything we try to build up and capacity, we have to do. We have our best school is Google, YouTube, and we have the world at our fingertips potentially to try and teach each other and to try and learn. But when they silence that tool, then we are unable to learn and try and that's the hardship of the youth. If we didn't know, at least if we had internet, we could look up stuff. We can find out about COVID. What's the rate in Bangladesh? What's happening with the global pandemic right now? How do we keep ourselves safe? And even now, we don't know what rates was happening. So when COVID was in full swing in the camps, we had no idea what was happening. We were placed under the darkness. So you'll read full excerpts of this in this report. So I want to quote. So as the English quote he just read says, we have long pushed for restoration of internet. Now that we've got the internet, we still want to increase the bandwidth because this is something that we are still facing. So the impact is, people's lives these days, not just us in the Rohingya camps and the refugee camps, but everywhere we look around the world. The internet, the connectivity is so essential to our life. It's become a basic human right of sort. And when you turn off the internet, you are just priming people for these kind of deprivation of human rights that are so essential. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. Thank you, Ko Samka, for highlighting. Ko Samka says, thank you, Ko Kimao, for highlighting education, health. And can I just ask one offshoot for you, Ko Kimao? So, about what you touched on about communication with loved ones. If you could talk about it, about the connection. Yes, thank you, Kosanka. It's, as I was saying, that it's so hard, when we didn't have the internet, we couldn't connect, you know, we try to reach out to our relatives, or they want to try and find out if we're okay, and and we try and try, and when the internet was down, we would not get through. Same thing if there was a family emergency or somebody needs help transporting people to the hospital. So these were the kind of impact that you see. It, communication is so essential, especially communication with family and relatives, as well as it impacts potential life savings aid that relatives we could do it. And also, if there's danger in the camps or if there's issues in the camps, whether it's security threats, we try to get the word out to each other through the communication. Same thing if we don't suspect a certain person or an unsavory characteristic, how we have no way of vetting or sharing that information and raising a red alert and flagging it with each other. So these are things that you would think that the internet would not relate it, but it really does. And it's just we had these restrictions and lockdowns and infringement on our human rights in Myanmar, and now here we are in the 1 year that we were deprived of it in human rights violations once again once we arrived in the refugee camps of Bangladesh. So thank you.
ဟုတ်ကဲ့ကိုခင်မောင်ကျေးဇူးအများကြီးတင်ပါတယ်ဆိုတော့ကျွန်တော်ကိုကျော်စန်းစီပဲ
Thank you, Kokimao, for presenting. I would like to now go back to Gojo-san. It seems like every time we try to get Gojo-san to talk, he's frozen. Okay, now he's back.
ရပြီလားကို
Can you hear us, Gojo-san?
ဟယ်လိုကိုကျော်စန်းကြားလားကိုကျော်စန်းဒီ
Gojo-san?
ဘာမစ်နဲ့အင်္ဂလိပ်နဲ့မှားနေလားမသိဘူး
Can you switch, can you make sure you're on the right channel from English and Burmese, because we can't hear you. Just go to the Burmese channel, Gojo-san. Gojo-san, I still can't hear you.
No.
No, Gojo-san.
ဘာမစ်ဆိုတဲ့ channel ပြောင်းလိုက်လား
Did you change to the Burmese channel?
ပြောင်းထားတယ်နော်
You did? Okay.
ပြောင်းထားတယ်အခုအဲ့ဆိုပြန်ထွက်ပြီးပြန်ဝင်မှရမှာတင်
Maybe Gojo-san, you should leave sometime with the glitch. You should leave the session and then try and come back.
I can hear.
We still can't hear you.
Log out and log in again.
Yeah, log out and log in again.
Log out လုပ်ပြီးတော့ပြန် log in ပြန်
Brother, can you log out and then try and come back in?
So ကျွန်တော်တစ်ချက်လေးမြေတားရခံချင်တာကတော့အခုလာတဲ့တက်ရောက်လာကြတဲ့လူ
I hope that people who are attending, thank you so much for attending, and if you've got questions, feel free to start chatting in the chat box. We will try and answer some of them as we've got lots of questions already starting to flow in, but while we wait for these technical difficulties, please go ahead and try to put in your questions in the meantime while we wait for Gojo-san to try and connect with us from Rakhine State. Apologies for this delay, everybody. Can I just add one thing while we're waiting? So one thing related to the internet shutdown. And the biggest excuse they give the Bangladeshi authorities is security. They keep saying they turned it off for a full year because of security. I truly believe that one of the ways that the authorities have been so effective was that, they silenced us for almost a year by turning off, and perhaps powerful authorities and governments, they don't realize how how effective this, and they realize how effective this tool is in silencing those of us who are striving for human rights, working for promoting of the different types of freedoms that we're calling for. It's a purpose strategic tactic to silence. And that's how I truly believe. And if you look at it, and it's not just us, you can see it inside Myanmar as well as elsewhere. And that's why we truly believe that it's a tool, effective tool to silence, and a serious violation is how we can see it. So thank you for that. I just wanted to add.
I'll jump in while we wait for a moment, but I think one thing that we note in the report, which underscores what Go King Mang was just saying, is that the shutdown in the camps started just a month after a large demonstration that folks in the camps put together to memorialize the cleansing operation. And, in light of that timing, I think that underscores what Go King Mang and others in the camps suspect about the motivations of the government. And ironically, with the stories that we've heard and the stories that are so well documented in this report, while they may say it's internet shutdowns are for the sake of security, we actually see negative impacts on people's health and security and safety from those shutdowns. We may have our guests back with us.
Gojo-san, we still can't hear you. Gojo-san, you're muted. We can't see it. I think his internet line is very down. It's extremely poor from his bandwidth. So we can't do anything about it. Kanale, Go King Mang, just wait. Why don't we wait for the Q&A till the end, please? If Gojo-san can't do it, then we will go over to Jess around the international human rights parameters. Then we can circle back. Hopefully, we think that Gojo-san can overcome the thing. We're gonna try and either get Gojo-san. He's trying. If he gets in, we'll let him talk, and then otherwise we'll go to Jess before we jump to the Q&A. Okay. So especially, so can we turn it over to Jess, perhaps with regards to the ramifications and the international human rights law?
Sure,
Jess.
thanks, Gotanga. So it is such an honor and a privilege to be here today and to work with this incredible group of folks. It was a tremendous learning opportunity for me and really just a wonderful opportunity. The Cyberlaw Clinic, along with the International Human Rights Clinic at HLS, where Yi typically works, although she's on leave at the moment. We're just so proud to be involved with this report and really proud to be able to highlight the voices of folks like Go King Mang and Go Kyo-san who are living through this situation. I think, as challenging as it is to have the connection issues from Rakhine, it actually illustrates very well what are one of the recommendations that we make, which is that the 2G service that's provided there at the moment is totally inadequate for free expression, right? He's attempting to document and to share about these impacts and is unable to do so in a webinar because of the services. And in the camps in Bangladesh, Gokeng Maung organized some members of the Rohingya Youth Association yesterday evening to survey the internet speeds that were available, and no one had a speed in the megabits per second. So everyone was under 1 megabit per second, and that's even with the internet restoration. So when we talk about internet shutdowns, we mean not just the absolute absence of internet, but also these inadequate bandwidth speeds. So I want to talk a little bit about the legal background here. We've been seeing an increasing emphasis on digital rights from human rights experts at the UN and elsewhere, but particularly you see folks like Michelle Bachelet and UN special rapporteurs, special mandate holders directly addressing digital rights, including in particular with regard to situations like those of the Rohingya. Special Rapporteur Tendai Achiumi released a report at the end of last year about how digital technology is being used in border situations to negatively impact communities, racialized communities. So she's the special mandate holder on racism and xenophobia. We also had the special rapporteur on extreme poverty, outgoing Special Rapporteur on Extreme Poverty, Philip Alston, write a report on how digital technologies are negatively impacting the poor. And I think that that widespread interest is indicative of one of the key findings of the report, which is something that you've already really heard previewed in what Gosangha and Gokeng Maung said, which is that free expression is a big area of impact for certain, when we think about internet shutdowns and their human rights ramifications, and other civil and political rights, of course, but that there are also other human rights that are impacted by internet shutdowns, some through the restriction of free expression and some directly, including economic, social, and cultural rights protected in the ICE, SCR, such as the right to health, the right to work, and the right to education. And I think that some of the stories that Gokeng Maung shared from the camp in this webinar and that you will be able to read about in the report just really underline the horror of what it is to be deprived of some of those rights. I mean, I think for those of us who have been enduring the COVID pandemic with access to the internet and access to reliable public health information, it has been difficult enough. It is really horrific to imagine what it must have been like for folks in the refugee camps to be enduring this deadly new disease without being able to access that type of information. Not to mention ordinary health crises, such as the ones that Gokeng Maung mentioned, where elderly folks need to be actually carried through the camps to get to access to healthcare. And if their younger relatives aren't physically at home with them, they weren't able to contact them to get them to come and transport them to receive healthcare. I also want to talk briefly about the inadequacy of domestic law to deal with the shutdowns in Myanmar and in Bangladesh. In Myanmar, when the Ministry of Transport and Culture announced the shutdown, they have not to date offered what the legal basis is. So they haven't specified what domestic law the internet shutdown in Rakhine and Chin states was based on. And one of the foundational principles of international human rights law is that restrictions of human rights should have a legal basis. In Bangladesh, the authorities did specify the law under which the internet shutdown was enacted, but it is an incredibly broad law that sort of vaguely specifies security concerns. And as the stories that we've already heard here today and that we document in the report illustrate, very frequently the impact of the internet shutdown, as actually observed on the ground, was negative on security for those impacted. It's also necessary for the other two arms of the core principles are that restrictions of human rights have to have a legitimate aim, and that they must be proportionate to that aim. And I think in both cases, in the restrictions in Myanmar and in Bangladesh, we neither see a clear legitimate aim articulated by the authorities, and even to the extent that there may be such an aim, it's I suppose conceivable that there are some conflict situations where a limited restriction of some internet services could be merited for national security reasons, and an all-out shutdown that applies to all services and lasts for months is certainly not proportionate to any kind of aim that was articulated or could be observed here. And so in both cases, we see, first of all, the restrictions that were in place, the total restrictions that were in place as being violative of international human rights, and further, that the speeds that are available in the affected townships in Rakhine, as well as in the Bangladeshi camps, remain really inadequate to support the human rights needs of people in 2021, when it is so necessary to access the internet to perform basic functions of human life. And I really hope that we can get Kintha's perspective here, but I'll highlight one theme that came up frequently in our interviews there, just in case, which is that many people actually in these affected townships relied on email for their work, or to look for work if they didn't have it yet. We saw that less so in the refugee camps because for the most part, the refugees are prohibited from working, don't have work permits. But in Myanmar, folks had jobs and were unable to do them without access to email. So I think that I'll wrap up there for the time being, and maybe we'll see if we can get Kintha back on the line.
Gojo-san, do you want to try and see if we can hear you?
Hello,
Gojo-san?
Majaya. Okay.
So, Gojo-san, can you hear us? I can see that you're trying to communicate to us, but on our end, we can't hear anything from you.
Okay, I
think let's go to Q&A so that we'll do Q&A. I'm sure there's lots of questions. We're seeing a lot of people putting it in 10 questions in the Goye, can you help us facilitate the Q&A? So thank you very much for the presenters and for those of you who are joining and participating through the Q&A. Also, thank you very much for your interest in this topic. I just want to add, so please feel free to, we've got lots of questions flowing in, but we'll try and get to as much as we can while keeping an eye to, we'll do the first round. So the first question I want to ask is, I will go and direct the Q&As to each of them. And then we'll come back and then we're going to talk about the recommendation before we close off, okay? And we will end with sort of our recommendations. And perhaps maybe there'll be a second round of questions after that. So let's start off. So my first question is for our final panelist, Jess. The first question for you, Jess. First question, Jess, since you're an expert working on digital rights internationally and in so many contexts, I was wondering, one of the questions is like, why do you think this internet shutdown, your assessment on the internet shutdown in Myanmar, but also, we've already seen it, as Ko Kim Aung said, about the deprivation in Bangladesh, and you can see the authorities responding and restoring. But here, we're now entering the 2.5 year of the shutdown point. So I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about the deprivation as well as the 2G restoration. Do you think, and do you have a sense or place the context of Myanmar against the larger picture on how and why the authorities could perhaps be using the internet shutdown as a tool?
So it's hard for me to speculate from outside of Myanmar and Bangladesh on why the authorities are using this as a tool, although I can make some comparisons with internet shutdowns that have occurred in other places. So this is one of the longest, if not quite the longest, internet shutdowns in the world. And so it is certainly, the Myanmar shutdown is certainly exceptional on that basis. But unfortunately, there is a rising trend of internet shutdowns around the world. And so those of you who follow international news may have seen in the last week or so that as Uganda underwent its elections, which have been challenged by the candidate who was not officially declared the winner as illegitimate, the authorities there imposed a shutdown during that period of time. In that case, we're counting the shutdown in days, not in months or certainly in years. But there is a campaign organized by Access Now and other NGOs around the world that uses the hashtag Keep It On. So folks on Twitter can follow it there or search for Keep It On and see some of the findings that they've had. But they've documented over 100 internet shutdowns around the world in the last couple of years. And we just see that they are typically shorter in length. I will also say that they are more typical of authoritarian governments, right? We see more of the internet shutdowns and more lengthy internet shutdowns where we don't have, democratic rule.
Thank you so much, Jess, for that insightful analysis and for comparing us about and reminding us just how historic and long, and to highlight really this is something that we are standing out, like you said, the uniqueness of Myanmar. And this is really why we encourage those of you to follow, and we have been collaborating with Keep It On the ground here in Myanmar. So as Athan, this has been a campaign that we've been part of. So for any attendees who are also interested, just join the work and check out why this is such an important issue, and take like Jess said, there's so many countries around the world also similar to us. So one of the questions I have is to Ko Kim Aung. So Ko Kim Aung, one of the questions is, especially in Cox's Bazar. So they've restored it in Cox's Bazar, but so what are the what are the ramifications you're still feeling from your nearly year-long internet shutdown you've had in Bangladesh? Thank you. One of the things that I've been really worried is that they're going to bring it back. Yes, we've had it restored, but as soon as, I mean, I personally, my assessment is, you know, we we've tried so hard to even have exchanges on Zoom to each other, like let's start at 10, let's have an exchange. Um, and but the problem is all throughout these camps in the world's largest refugee camps, the bandwidth is fluctuating. We have not been able to have one single Zoom meeting with each other. Yes, it's been restored, but one person can access it at 9 o'clock in the morning, another at noon, another at 10. How are we going to do it? Um, we we need exchange of ideas or collaboration. And now with the pandemic, the only way we can do it is that we are. So, for example, I've just been alerted by my colleagues here in the camps is that we've had 40 attendees who are from the camps who want to join this session and who have tried repeatedly, and they're messaging me in real time right now trying to get in, and they are unable to get in. So that to me is an indicative example of why, despite the quote unquote restoration, it's not really access for us. And I'm so worried. What if they do it again? And I hope that you all will pray that that won't happen to us. Thank you so much, Go Kemal, for that. Um, to summarize, like you said, while you've got the restoration, the bandwidth is fluctuating, the access is poor, and it's been such a challenging and difficult trying to access them. And can I just add one additional question? You mentioned about education. You talked about education. So, is there anything else that you'd like to discuss around network issues related to security, perhaps? I think those were the two things, education and security in the camps. If you could just tell us maybe a quick summary, any new updates around that. Thank you very much. So earlier, I
ရောက်တယ်လို့ပြောတယ်ဒါလည်းသူတို့ကပြင်လဲလမ်းပွင့်ရောက်ပါတယ်ဘာဖြစ်လို့ဆိုတော့သူတို့ဥပမာတချို့လူတွေကိုသူတို့မလေးရှားတို့ဘာတို့ဖဲခေါ်တာရှိမှာသူတို့ family နဲ့စကားပြောတာရှိမှာများသောပြင်သူတွေက watcher ဆိုတဲ့ဟာရကိုတွန်းတယ်သူတို့အဲ့ဒါနဲ့ဆုံးပွားတော့ဟိုမှာအိုင်မိုးတွန်းတယ်ဒါပူရအတန်ပြေအဲ့ဒီလူတွေကအဲ့ဒါမျိုးသမီးကတကြနိုင်ရင်ကိုလွေးပွားတော့ So
we have to try and find ways around these networks shutdown. And the once again, they always claim that there's trafficking in the camps or there's security. And the thing is, like, for us, they claim that the trafficking is being coordinated, illegal organizations are being done through this social media or telecommunication. But in reality, for us, we are trying to converse with other folks elsewhere, trying to educate ourselves through YouTube, trying to learn, and try to make up for lost time for us. You know, and in a way, the ones who have illegal means and acquire these skills, perhaps they have a way to get around this internet shutdown. But the ones who bear the brunt and who feels the impact of the shutdown is not necessarily them per se, but it's the rest of us in the camps. I have had so many calls with loved ones where I'm trying to tell them how I am and how I'm doing, but at the same time, we can't find, we have to find different ways, or through Messenger, through alternative apps. We're constantly trying to test just how much we can do that. So thank you, Go Kemal. I'm going to now turn it over to Go Ka. So my question is, in the past, earlier we talked a lot about, which is about digital rights and why digital rights as well as human rights is so essential. I mean, Jess and other people have covered it. So we are apparently on the path to democracy. We have civilian governments talking about working towards democracy. And this is one of the platforms that the civilian government ran on, that let's vote for change and so forth and so on. and that we will overhaul the institutions and work towards democracy and transforming our societies. But here we are 2.5 years into this internet shutdown. What are really like indicative or the challenges of this path to democracy? I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that. Thank you so much for that. So when we talk about freedom of expression, every time we monitor freedom of expression and infringement of rights, the biggest exemplification of the silencing and the muffling and the hindering of freedom of expression is right here in this internet shutdown. This affects millions of people. It affects millions of people in on the ground and the ripple out effects that are felt by these people. Like Jess said, the proportionality, the disproportionate effect. Look at how many people are affected by it daily and this impact. And that's why we determine and we assert that this is a gross violation of our fundamental human rights. And I want, if we look at the recommendation aspect of our report, as governments, they need to be in line with the international standards. So that's one of the things that we're trying to ask for. Make sure that if you are going to persist with these historic internet shutdown, that they are in line with international human rights standards and the different tests. It's not enough for you to restore. Like Ko Kim An says, like the way he's worried. Fine, look at us, 2G restoration. We are always under the threat and the fear that at any time, authoritarians, governments, people, the law is in their hands, the powerful's hands, so they can, there's the law, they can determine whichever provision under whichever law. So we really plea to the civilian government as well as the different governments. They can at any given time, like Ko Kim Hon says, deprive it. They can turn off the phone. They can seize our thing. So it's not just about returning our right to access to internet. It's ensuring that legitimate and proportionate and internationally in line with the human rights standard laws and the law reform is what we need in our country. And until we do that, the threat that Ko Kim Aung talks about in Bangladesh of returning and infringement of rights is something that is a very real threat in our country as well. And it's a political decision. And this is a political problem created by political goals. And you've got, it's they have point to, for example, an Rakhine ethnic armed organization, Arakan Army, and like in Bangladesh, saying that this is security. And we're talking about Rakhine, which is active armed conflict. So what about troop movements? For civilians and people who need to know troop movements to keep safe, these are essential. Yes, it's a battle between the military, Tamador, and the AA, but the civilians are the ones who are caught inside. And yes, nowadays the AA and Tamador are talking about peace or forging for peace, and hopefully, that will eventually lead. They've had an informal ceasefire for some time. So, of course, in the military decision and strategy, perhaps maybe, we hope that inroads between the two armed groups will lead to a restoration of internet. But I think we really want to pressure. We tried at the 1 year mark to try and push for the civilian government to restore, and we need to keep pushing this government at every opportunity, at every juncture. That why shutdown of internet is a giant domino effect and the adverse impact that are fed by people on the ground. And we need to keep pressuring them and keep ensuring, like, if I have to summarize what you asked, Goye. So when we say democracy, the fundamental aspects of democracy is rooted in these human rights: right to health, right to education. So if a government is dedicated and committed to it, you can't say democracy and yet take away people's rights. And in a way, it's really lying to the people. So it's really important that democracy doesn't become an empty word, but really show through actions. And I think really people need to put weight behind it and stand for those principles and restore the internet as soon as possible, crucial in places like Rakhine and Chin State. Thank you, Kosamka, for making that political analysis. And like you said, what's happening in Rakhine and the conflict, and tying all that together. Thank you. We really appreciate that. So Jess also mentioned it even about how, they talk about security, but behind security, there's so many strands. That was something that we see running through this. So, between the conflict between Rakhine, at the Arakan army and Tamadol was what set off this internet shutdown, and they used security mirroring what was said. But behind that, there's much greater reasons. So, and I really like what you hit on about democracy and the essence of it, and that we really urge those of you who are attending, as well as, the reports like ours, hopefully draw attention to this ongoing plight, and that people will keep applying the pressure so that, we all of us will seize the opportunity to ensure that the internet, I really think that that's what's essential. And I also want to thank our interpreter, Mayiton, who's been interpreting this topic for us. So I I think I want to just present very close and concise key recommendations. Um, I will invite Gosamka again just to talk on the key, and then we'll put the slides up on the recommendations. And then as soon as that's done, let's turn it over to the questions that are coming right now. And please keep asking because we've got time still. We've got half an hour left. So Gosamka, please go ahead and cover the recommendations. Yes. So the main key recommendation, you'll see that in the full report, but here's the things that we want to highlight here in our PowerPoint. We've mentioned it again and again about how internet shutdown, not to fixate only on freedom of expression and the right to information, but it has a plethora of rights that are being infringed: education, work security, healthcare. We call on, our second recommendation is that the Myanmar government needs to restore 3G and 4G service all through the affected areas immediately. Next slide, please. And this is touching on calling on Bangladesh government. We know that the authorities have used the internet shutdown as a tool. Please to not return using this as a tactic to silence our Rohingya brothers, refugee brothers and sisters in the camps. They restored it, like Okemon says. However, you could see that this threat looms, and we just echo his messaging. And this is something that is within the powerful Bangladesh government's power, and we call on the government of Bangladesh to maintain and restore and ensure that this will not be used again as a tool of tactic against the Rohingya refugee. And same thing as Bangladesh and Myanmar, as we said, any deprivation of future internet shutdown need to be in line with international human rights law. Freedom of expression and letting people experience their full fundamental human rights is the crucial element of it. But if there, should they venture towards any sort of future internet shutdown, it needs to be in line with the different tests that just mentioned. I think, like we said, it's got to be legal, legitimate, and proportionate, and that's the extent of our recommendation. So why don't if I could suggest,
ကျွန်တော်တို့ဒီကိုကျော်ဆန်းက
ကိုကျော်ဆန်း
စကားပြောလို့မရဘူးဆိုမဲ့သူ line ပေါ်မှာတော့ရှိရဲဥပမာ
he's
Q&A
on the line. I wonder if he can, if Gojo-san, if we could prioritize Gojo-san's questions, maybe perhaps things related to the questions. And maybe Gojo-san, you could try your best to try and type some responses on the Q&A chat box. Maybe that's one way we can try and ensure that he has a way to participate as well. Yes, thanks, Gojo-san. We have tried to get, so Gojo-san, if you are unable to participate because of your bandwidth and access to internet, perhaps you could type questions or answer related to IDPs and what's happening in Rakhine State, and to text that in the Q&A answers. So we've got lots of questions now, so let's go through them. So there's a few questions related to the Bangladesh refugee camp. So I'm going to turn it over, the first question, to Go Kim Mao. The first question, and you've mentioned it earlier. 2 questions to 3 questions. They're very similar, which is,
ထဲမှာရှိနေတဲ့ဒီကျမကြီးဆောင်ရှောက်မှုကျမကြီးလည်းလက်မှီမှုနဲ့အခြေအနေတွေကဘယ်လိုရှိနေလဲ
can you tell us about the health information,
ကျမကြီးဆိုင်ရာဆောင်ရှောက်မှုတွေလက်မှီမှုတွေကိုဘယ်လောက်ထိတက်ရောက်နေလဲဆိုတာမျိုး
have you been able to access the information around health now? So if you could talk a little bit about, given COVID and everything, the impact in. This is a really important question, so thanks for giving me that chance. So I just want to add, we're still worried about our health concerns under pandemic. So the NGOs who work on health in the camps, they work on basic health. So because of the fighting and the atrocity crimes and the people who have had, there's a lot of people with severe injuries and people who are still dealing with pre-existing diseases and, conditions. And our access to health is not unencumbered. We get discriminated when we try to access healthcare services, dealing with different authorities. Like we said, so for example, our women, Rohingya women, trying to access and trying to need accompaniment to go access that. We can't call ambulance, like talking about if we call the authorities to help us, sometimes they don't answer. So there's a lot of deprivation of our rights. So you can see that even before the internet shutdown, some of these challenges that we have living in a country at the host countries and the authorities, right? So you take the very extremely difficult situation that we were already in, and you deprive the internet, and it only serves to hamper and heighten the challenges that we've always been experienced. So
customer patient and
there's a lot of need for empathy towards our people in these countries and also in the camps, to be treated as human beings and not to be deprived of these rights is something that I just want to touch on. So I want to ask the next question to Jess. Jess, you probably can see some of these questions yourself.
Bangladesh as well as Myanmar to this word networks and lawful ways to the Hallyu. Yeah, please answer this question.
Sure. So I think that we can see in Bangladesh where the authorities pointed to domestic law when they enacted the shutdown, that you know, recent advances in ICT law there are being used for this purpose, right? It's a relatively recent law, but so there is a domestic basis. So an argument, at least, that it is a domestically legal shutdown. Even where that's true, and that's not true necessarily in Myanmar, where we don't actually even understand which domestic law the authorities believe justifies or gives them the authority to have ordered the shutdown in Rakhine and Shin states. But even where there is some level of domestic authorization, we can still make the argument that the shutdown does not adhere to international human rights law or standards. And in fact, the UN Human Rights Council said in a comment to the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights that generic shutdowns of internet services are highly unlikely and probably always violate free expression. So where you have these very broad shutdowns, there is unlikely, at least in the perspective of the Human Rights Council, ever to be truly legal or to comport with international human rights law standards.
Okay, Jess.
Thank you very much, Jess. You've got a few more questions, and we've got 15 more minutes left. So we're ending. We've got. So we'll take the rest of our time. A few more 15 minutes left. So let's try and get a few more questions for our guest speakers. So Kosamka, I want to ask you. One of the questions that's asked.
Telecom community ကိုပေါ့နော်ဖိအားပေးပြီးတော့ internet ပြန်ဖွင့်ပေးအောင်ဘယ်လိုလုပ်လို့ရလဲဆိုတဲ့မေးခွန်းမေးထားပါတယ်ဆိုတော့ဒီမှာ
One of the questions was asking was like, is there a way for Athan or other NGOs on the group, can you engage or approach telecommunications companies to try and restore internet shutdown in Myanmar? I wonder if you could talk a little bit about your own experience engaging with this question and dealing with telecom community companies. So when we talk about different international companies that are operating in places like Myanmar, it's very crucial that they need to ensure that they need to abiding by business and human rights law principle. And we try to approach these telco companies in their home countries and pressuring them and ensuring that they keep in line and abide by business and human rights obligations working in Myanmar. We try and approach and do advocacy internationally with telecom groups. So for example, we've approached Ooredoo, Telenor, but we've not really approached Mytel as it's affiliated with the military interests and economic interests there. We've also tried even with the national carriers such as MPT or Myanmar Telecom. The most positive response we've had has been from Telenor. Other carriers have not been as open to collaboration, but Telenor, they have tried and they are trying in their own right. But their hands are tied because of the structure and the way in which Myanmar law operates. They acknowledge that this is unfair. Telenor acknowledges that this is unfair and this is something that should not be happening. So what we're now trying to do, our strategy, is that we are working as CSOs, trying to create a coalition, trying to work with these. We're going to have additional meetings with groups like them we don't know, because really the ultimate decision, telecoms could, I mean, the telecom companies could pack up shop and leave Myanmar, but that's not, it'll be it'll not be in line with their bottom line, as well as it doesn't help the government. So and it's not the telecom companies' fault per se, because they have laws in place that if they don't abide by the Myanmar directive, they can be penalized or kicked out of the country or deprived of that. So what I want to say is that we are trying to engage with these organizations or companies. We are trying to point to business and human rights principles and why it's essential. We think that these are avenues and platforms and tactics around that. So we highlight how the domestic laws are infringing the international human rights law and the different things. And this is a serious matter, which is why this time with the civilian government and the new parliament session, this is something that we're hopeful that the ultimate decider and the people who can really make a difference around this issue, the government, will prioritize this. Perhaps they have different agendas, but we hope that this will become an issue of importance to them. This is a new time, a new administration or new cabinet are just been about to be sworn in. We hope that if you prioritize this as a key issue for our country, we know that, and we know that you will be able to make a difference and end this right away.
Koye, can I come in?
Koyak,
Yes, please, Jess.
I just wanted to note that among all of the telcos in Myanmar, only Telenor is a member of the Global Network Initiative, which is a multi-stakeholder organization of ICT companies and civil society organizations and academics and investors. And I represent my organization on the board of that organization, but the purpose of the GNI is to create these types of engagements, opportunities for exchange between civil society organizations and the companies that are there. And then also the companies are held responsible for a set of principles and then a specific ways of implementing them that help them bring their practices that sort of reconcile this challenge that Kosongha so eloquently captured, which is that they only operate in countries pursuant to domestic law. If they violate domestic law, it's very possible that the government will just revoke their license. And so in order to be able to do sort of their best in a given country, and keep in mind international human rights law, the GNI principles actually allow them some concrete guidance on how to do that. So for example, they, under the GNI principles and implementation guidelines, will attempt to get a government to put into writing an order for a shutdown or an order to take content down, rather than just give it orally as the Ministry of Culture and Transport did in the case of the Rakhine and Chin shutdown. So I think that's another place that civil society can be helpful is encouraging ICT companies to join the GNI and have that additional angle of pressure and conversation.
Thank you, Jess, for helping us fill that in.
OECD guideline ကိုကင်ပြီးတော့ပဲဒီဘာလို့ဆိုတော့ Telenor ကဒီဟို
So for Telenor, Telenor is from Norway, and Norway is based out of the OECD or the operation cooperative of that. So we lean towards lobbying, putting pressure on Norway as well as Telenor, as well as the network that they belong part of. So these are just no matter how much Telenor wants to help or wants to try, I mean, we still can't deny that this is a deprivation of rights, and despite their best intention, we try. So I do see that, what the we have to try and find leverage points. It's great that Telenor is part of these things, but what do you do with MPT and Ooredoo who are not necessarily part of it? So trying to find those inroads is key. Thank you very much, both of you, Jess and Gosangka, for sharing those tactics and strategies. One more question. Kokima, I want to ask you one question. It relates to our report as well. As you can see, our report is called Lockdown and Shutdowns, and it's about lockdown. So the question that was asked is, for Rohingyas who are limited for the, unable to travel freely, move freely in Myanmar. So one of the questions that was asked was around, there was a question about freedom of movement as well as Orwellian society almost, and it's almost sort of like a prison, as putting these communities like yours that you belong to in this kind of prison in. So can you tell us a little bit about the systems that have led to this system of lockdown in Myanmar as well as perhaps now in Bangladesh? And that was one of the questions that was asked. And given that this is a topic title around lockdowns, and which is the name of our report, so I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the lockdown side, Kokima. So one of the things that I've said since the beginning, when I first came into this refugee camp, when we fled Myanmar, we lived in these really rural, remote places in Rakhine State.
Bangladesh နိုင်ငံမှာနေတဲ့စင်ကောင်းကြီးသုံးပုနှစ်ပုံကကျွန်တော်တို့နယ်ရဲ့ Cox's Bazar area
So also talking about the situation of lockdown and our daily lives. We are living in the world's largest refugee camp, where 2/3 the congestion of these camps, right? The volume of people that had to flee across Myanmar to enter a camp that the surface area, the area of that camp is disproportionate to how many people are living there. And even that, right? The right to space, the right to live freely within our camps and not being able to go. Of course, these are deprivation of our rights. So we feel like people are not being able to live to the fullest of their abilities, are able to live freely. We are confined to these camps. Our food is handed out by rations. We are we are so close to Cox's Bazar, and yet we're not allowed to go to Cox's Bazar, which is where the host country lives. If we need to go to referral for a medical appointment, or if we have to go for an errand in Cox's Bazar, you need to get sign off from officials. You need to get, say if you're a patient and you need to only go to the referral of the special hospital that's in Cox's Bazar, and you only have a window, say 12 hours, and you can't get the approval of the authorities to get that health care or even referral, there's nothing you can do about it. And that's the kind of, you can see our freedom of movement is controlled, our health is compromised, and these are the layers of the deprivations that we're subjected to living in Bangladesh and other countries. And we urge the international community and others to ensure that the fundamental humane situation remains for us. So I think we've got 5 minutes left, so I just want to go to a few more questions. There's a really good question that's coming up. One of the questions is around digital rights. So we talk about Myanmar and Bangladesh and the digital rights. People talk about, we don't have digital protection laws for the people and even privacy laws in Myanmar. There's no laws on the books and there's no proper standards.
ဒီကုမ္ပဏီတွေပြီးတဲ့အခါမှာဒီအစိုးရတွေကအသုံးချလာကြမယ်ဒါပေမဲ့တစ်ဖက်ကလည်းပဲဒီပြည်သူတွေမှာဒီကျွန်တော်က digital security တွေပြီးတဲ့အခါမှာကျွန်တော်တို့က privacy ကိစ္စရပ်တွေမှာကာကွယ်ပေးနိုင်တဲ့ဥပဒေတွေကလည်းမရှိသေးတဲ့အခါမှာဘယ်လိုအခြေအနေတွေဖြစ်လာနိုင်လဲဆိုတာကို
So think ahead. One of the question asked about, Jess, I would like to ask, or in Kosongka, to think about the fact that we don't have digital rights as well as privacy laws, but the future ramifications for companies as well as people, some things to think about in the future should these come into play. Who wants to go for Jess or Kosongka? Jess, why don't you go first?
Okay, I can be quick. So I think there are two sort of countervailing trends internationally, one being the move that's really led by the European Union with GDPR. And many countries around the world have made an effort to reform their data protection laws in order to come into compliance with the GDPR so that they can trade data with European citizens with European companies. And so, we can look forward in one direction and sort of see the influence of Europe sort of and the protections that have been offered to European citizens expanding around the world. And they've certainly been a leader there. On the other hand, in other countries like Russia and China, we're seeing sort of the opposite move with laws like data localization laws that require companies, the internet companies that operate in those jurisdictions to store the data locally, which are generally regarded as motivated by the desire of the government to get access to that information. So it may not be a sort of commercial privacy risk, but it is a privacy risk vis-a-vis the government. And also in repressive regimes around the world, increasing and very worrisome moves toward direct access measures. So actually being able to access telecommunications networks, voice and text and internet without having to make a request or even necessarily with the awareness of the telco operator, that the government would just have a direct line in. And so I would say it's hard to look forward into the future because we see these two very countervailing trends that are in some ways opposite happening in different countries around the world. But over to you, Kosanga. I'm interested in your perspective on Myanmar in particular.
So for Myanmar, I'm going to give you an example that happened just over these last couple of days. We can see anytime we're doing documents or serving any contract, they want all the information around our data, our national identity card, where we live, what we do. So the government in the previous fiscal budget year, they put up for example, in Parliament, that one of the budget that they flagged was around intercepts. We are for sure being under watch, or it's coming. Of course, they might, those of us, the troublemakers, the ones who are constantly critiquing, constantly speaking out, we can't tell how they're monitoring, but we think that that is something that's in the works. At any time, they can hack. They've got the technical know-how. We know that the risks are quite high, and we know that we're being monitored. So I hope that people will think about what privacy. And right now we have no protection. They can do anything. I mean, at any time at Myanmar, they can do anything under the law. They can intercept. They've got the hacking. So we don't have any protection domestically. And we're already seeing viscerally through the budgets. We don't have a policy to protect people's privacy, but we're already starting to see this move toward monitoring. I've heard, for example, companies
phone record ထုတ်ပေးလိုက်ရတယ်ပေါ့နော်
So companies being subpoenaed or requested to hand over cases or relevant data related to a specific case. The government demands it, and the companies have had no chance but to offer it over. So, whether it's cases around criminal nature or others like rape or robbery or things like that, we think that for cases like those, perhaps if there's extremely incriminating evidence that's applicable in protecting and ensuring there's justice, for sure, I think there's a balance and you can definitely hand over data. But for quote unquote the monitoring of activists and human rights defenders, it's quite worrisome. And people inside Myanmar know full well at the lack of privacy. And if you post something critical or you're critiquing or say something like that, it could be captured and then you could be sued. So the law as its reach, or the countersuits if you posted something. So for example, in that case that I was mentioning about the countersuit between even a civil matter, the police, for example, the police would demand certain information and people would turn it over, right? So, not just the company, not just the monitoring, but like no doubt the telecom companies can't operate above the mandate of the government or the parameters set by the government. And for them, they're still going to think about how they operate, the license, the bottom line for business interests. Companies, local Myanmar companies are no doubt going to, I don't think privacy at the end of the day when facing against the mechanism of the government is not going to prevail. So we hope that data protection is going to be something that will happen. We hope that it'll be something that will be ensuring that the citizens will be protected, and especially human rights defenders who are being monitored and cataloged, and we need something to protect our safety. And that's it. Thank you, Jess Gosamka. We don't have, thank you for giving us a glimpse into sort of without data protection, how do we do that? Data and privacy, that's right balance. And it's really important to monitor the laws that are going to be passed, perhaps. So I'm just mindful that we are already over the time, 3 minutes over of the time. We just want to say thank you so much for attending, for coming out to our events, and for all our esteemed panelists for speaking. We first want to thank you again for coming out, and we hope that you will read the full report. We will be putting it online. All 5 organizations are co-publishing it. And we just want to say it's been a pleasure for us working together on this collaboration. As we said earlier, this has been, we have to keep the pressure on. We have to keep these voices going, and the voices from the ground, from different communities, and start this movement going. Especially, we need to point out the unfair nature in which internet shutdowns are being used by authoritarianist governments. And I think it's important that we need to highlight, and everybody's touched on it. We've covered it fully, but we want to thank again for Mayuton, who's been interpreting in real time for us, who's been co-writing. Thank you very much for that. And it's over the time, so we apologize to those of you who were unable to answer your questions. We hope that feel free to reach out to these organizations through social media, through our emails, and keep asking, and we'll try and do what we can and endeavor to answer your questions. We encourage students and academics and others, and this is exactly why 5 groups like ours came together for this. And on behalf of everybody, please feel free to reach out through these different platforms related to it. And And we will be pushing out the report in both English and Burmese, so stay tuned and it'll be coming out. So read it in close detail. We were only able to cover an excerpt from the report, but check our websites, our different groups, and we will be putting it up shortly. So please download it and read it.
ဒီဖြစ်တဲ့အထူးသဖြင့်မြန်မာနိုင်ငံအစိုးရကတော့ဒီကျွန်တော်တို့ကအင်တာနက်ပြန်လည်ဖွင့်ပေးဖို့အတွက်အ
And
မြန်ဆုံး
we
ပြန်လည်
just want to reiterate again the key recommendation, which is the need to restore the internet shut down immediately. It's not 2G. It needs to be restored 3 and 4G internet for Bangladesh. We need to ensure our Rohingya brothers and sisters and refugees are no longer held under this threat of internet shutdown that could return at any time for them, and to ensure that the network speeds are able so that our refugee friends and colleagues are able to still freely exercise their rights. And once again, to reiterate all the tests that we've been saying, if in the future internet shutdowns like these historic ones that we're seeing in these two countries are going to happen again, it needs to be in line with international human rights standards. It needs to be proportionate, legitimate, and in line with that. So, and that with that, please allow me to summarize and thank you all again and the panelists and all the writers and the drafters. Thank you, and let me end this report launch today. Thank you very much.